Now, recognizing that attempts to bribe the industry and the public into EV adoption have literally failed at this point, continue mandating CAFE standards, EPA tailpipe standards that are de facto EV mandates. And ideological allies in 12 states are seeking to ban the sale of non-EV cars. Now, we can talk about the proper role of government. That'd be a great conversation, because I don't think that we have the authority or should have the authority to limit what consumers can buy in this regard, or what they can own. But clearly, Mr. Secretary, this isn't working. So I'm wondering, is there some point, and if you've identified some point where you will stop, where the administration will stop, where the federal government will stop this requirement and let the market decide, as opposed to this central planning model and this dictatorial policy?
Well, thank you. Given time is limited, I will confine myself to addressing the factually incorrect portions of what you have said, beginning with the assertion that EV sales are going down. They are, in fact, going up.
Does that include the government sales or private sales?
Every single year,
private sales
more
or government
Americans
sales,
have purchased
Mr. Secretary?
EVs. The entire market.
The government's forced to buy them, so sales are going up. But private sector,
there are private sales too. Yeah.
I'd like those numbers.
Sure. 1.2 million EVs were sold in the U.S. in 2020.
How many government and how many private?
We'll get you that breakout, but as you know, more private citizens buy EVs than government purchases.
No, I don't.
Let me address the second factual mistake in your remarks, which was that EV costs are getting higher. They're in fact getting lower, and according to J.D. Power, have now reached parity or are slightly lower than the equivalent gas-powered car. That does include the subsidy. That's right. But the point is, they are going lower.
But they're not, because we're all buying them.
Your statement that they are going up is incorrect. The third incorrect assertion you made is that sales dropped in Q1. They did not drop compared to Q1 of the previous year. Of course, if you compare them to Q4, they drop, because they always do, because car sales are seasonal. But I would imagine most people are aware of that. And
no,
fourth,
I'm talking about
I want to
particular
address
EV, Q4 to Q1. EV, not just overall car sales.
Any car sales go down Q1 to Q4, because more people buy cars in Q4. But what I'm telling you is every single year, more Americans buy EVs than the year before. And the word tailspin is just a bizarre word to use for a growing sector of our economy. We also think that since that's the way that the market is headed, we should not allow China to build on the advantage that they developed during the Trump administration, not because they're environmentalists, but because they understand the economic power of trying to dominate the EV market. We want those EVs to be made in America, and increasingly they are.
I'm happy to have them made in America, Mr. Secretary. What I'm not happy about is the mandate. The American people should be able to buy
That brings me to the
any
fourth and
vehicle
final
that
thing
they
that
want
I need to challenge as being factually inaccurate, which there is no mandate. You can purchase a gas car if you want to pay gas prices at the pump, but if you don't, you can purchase an EV with our help.
This is Pete Buttigieg reminding Republican Congressman Scott Perry exactly what happens when you spout right-wing talking points, not just at Maria Bartiromo, but at someone who actually knows what he's talking about. Here, Perry takes up his party's mantle of doing the oil and gas industry's bidding by fear-mongering about EVs. You'll notice that Perry lies about EV costs, claiming that they're more expensive for consumers when in fact the polar opposite is true. EVs now cost as much as or less than regular gas-powered vehicles in the United States. And so given this new information, Perry of course moved the goalposts again, claiming that, okay, well that doesn't count because they're subsidized. First of all, yes, they're subsidized, but it does count because Americans are literally paying less. If you're paying $5,000 less for an EV than a gas-powered vehicle, consumers aren't thinking to themselves, sure, I'm paying $5,000 less, but that's only thanks to a subsidy. They're thinking, this costs $5,000 less. But perhaps the most important part, and I'm actually glad that Scott Perry is trying to qualify the cost of EVs by pointing to federal subsidies, because if his goal is to carry water for gas-powered vehicles, he should probably answer for the fact that the U.S. subsidizes fossil fuel companies to the tune of $20 billion per year. As for EVs, according to the Treasury, consumers have saved more than $1 billion in upfront costs on their purchase of more than 150,000 clean vehicles since January 1st, 2024. This milestone translates to consumers saving $1,750 annually, on average, on fuel and maintenance costs, or $21,000 of discounted savings over the typical 15-year lifespan of a vehicle, compared to a comparable gasoline vehicle. For the more than 150,000 vehicle sales that have used the upfront discount to date, this equates to around $262 million annually on fuel and maintenance costs, and up to $3.2 billion in costs over the life of the vehicle. So roughly $1 billion in subsidies for the first half of this year. If we extrapolate that out to $2 billion for the whole year, it still reaches just 10% of what we spent on fossil fuel subsidies this year. So according to Perry, US taxpayers shelling out $20 billion per year to the multi-billion-dollar corporations who pollute our environment is no big deal, totally fine, A-OK, but the relatively tiny subsidies for EVs are somehow disqualifying? Please, someone, make it make sense. And then there's the question of people actually buying EVs. Republicans are desperate to create this narrative that EV sales are lagging and that Americans are sprinting back to embrace gas-powered vehicles. And the goal is to create the optics of unpopularity for EVs, which will of course redound to the benefit of oil and gas companies who donate to Republicans' campaigns, which we'll get to in a moment. Only small problem here. There aren't fewer Americans buying EVs, there are more. The share of EVs sold relative to gas-powered cars is surging. Electric vehicles accounted for 8% of all new light-duty vehicle sales in the US in 2023, up from about 6% in 2022, and that number will continue to rise in 2024. By the first 3 quarters of 2023, the US had already sold more EVs than in all of 2022. And if you look at states like California, already a third of new vehicle sales are electric. All of this brings us one step closer to ending our reliance on fossil fuels and the countries that supply them, which of course is exactly what Republicans are trying to prevent. But here's what I don't understand. Fox and Republicans and the rest of the right-wing media ecosystem get their rocks off by fear-mongering about China on a daily basis. And yet, knowing that EVs are the future, in the same way that we knew beepers and fax machines and landlines were all obsolete, when given the chance to either own the future with EVs or cede it all to China, the right is perfectly content to do the latter? They claim that they don't want China to dominate us, but they're handing them the entire transportation sector. In other words, they talk a big game, but at the end of the day, there is no bigger ally to China's hope for dominance in the world than today's Republican Party. And that's a point that Pete Buttigieg brought up to me as well in a recent interview.
The other thing that's really big here is jobs. I come from the industrial Midwest. I know how helpful it can be to have auto manufacturing in your region, and I know how terrible it can be if your region loses out. And that's what happened in my hometown of South Bend when Studebaker closed. We have got to make sure that the next generation of cars, which will largely be electric, are made in the U.S. Under President Trump, frankly, they allowed China to get the advantage on EVs. We're taking that advantage back to America for American workers and American consumers, doubling down on that work. And we're excited to see that continue to develop, especially because I've seen the factories and the jobs that's going to create.
And of course, the reason why Republicans are so weak on this issue is simple. They are owned by the oil and gas companies. They are so desperate for their donations that they will do their bidding, even if doing so completely undermines their supposed opposition to Chinese dominance in the world. And so what we're left with is an effort by those at the top who want money to spout this narrative that climate change isn't real and that fossil fuels are fine and that any effort to transition to clean energy is a leftist plot to ruin your life and end this country. But let's be real, these people aren't dumb. They're liars, sure, but they're not dumb. They can see the impacts of climate change. They can see the record heat, the record wildfires, the record hurricanes, the record droughts. But Republicans collectively have received over $310 million in total from oil and gas companies who stand to benefit from entrenching the status quo. When we switch from oil and gas to renewables and clean energy, who do you think that impacts? The Exxons and BPs of the world. But those companies know that all it takes for some bad faith climate denialism is a few $1,000s to some spineless Republican politicians, and Democratic politicians in fairness, although not even close to the sheer quantity of those on the right. And then those people will come out and pretend that a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-century storm is just called autumn. In fact, if you want to know exactly why Scott Perry himself is fighting this fight, all you have to do is look at how much he was paid by oil and gas companies. Over $208,000. He is bought and sold. This is what it looks like when an industry owns a person. This is why the Scott Perrys of the world peddle this pathetic, shameless, embarrassing bullshit to the entire country. This is why he'll sell out the planet that his own kids and grandkids are going to inherit. When Republicans call themselves conservative, the only thing they're conserving is their own bank accounts. And yet while Republicans are pandering to the world's worst polluters for a few bucks, look at what this White House has done to lead us into the 21st century. Ground is broken on the nation's first high-speed rail, which will travel from Southern California to Las Vegas, cutting the trip in half from 4 hours to 2 hours. The project's expected to be completed in time for LA to host the 2028 Olympics. It'll also bring the US in line with a number of other industrialized countries, all of which boast lightning-fast high-speed rail. The White House also made good on another campaign promise and launched the Climate Corps, a new federal program that looks to employ hundreds of thousands of young Americans in the clean energy, conservation, and climate resilience sectors. In fact, the White House just announced the addition of a staggering 300,000 clean energy jobs. To put that into perspective, Biden has created more jobs in just clean energy alone than Donald Trump did during his entire presidency. From EVs to high-speed rail to protections for consumers, this administration is making good on its promises not only to bring the U.S. into the 21st century, but to create jobs and economic growth while doing it. That is what it looks like when a political party values innovation, jobs, and our future, as opposed to donations from oil and gas companies seeking to entrench our reliance on expensive and outdated forms of energy. And finally, as far as the implications of Republicans' actions, frankly, I really don't give a shit if I sound alarmist, but vast swaths of this planet will be and already are becoming uninhabitable because of the impacts of climate change. Scientists know this, young people know this, and everyone else willing to acknowledge objective reality knows this. The GOP and the media can both sides this issue into oblivion, but the debate is over. This administration and today's Democratic Party understand that, and they are working to fix it. The danger in allowing Republicans to take power cannot be overstated. We have an ever-shrinking window where we can actually save this planet. We're currently taking the most aggressive action that's ever been taken, but that will end the moment Republicans have the ability to do so. If you're a Republican voter, think about that. If you're a non-voter, think about that. If you have kids and want to make their life easy and enjoyable for the rest of their lives, think about that. This issue should transcend politics. It is existential for us as humans who share this planet. But the fact that Republican politicians will gladly politicize it for just a few bucks from oil and gas companies should be all the proof you need that their priority isn't us, it is their jobs and their own grip on power. I've got a really exciting announcement. I've written a book. It's called Shameless. This book explores how Republicans have exploited their historical branding while attacking our democracy, how the media has proven itself a willful participant, and how Democrats can learn from this to rebalance the political scales and save our democracy. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to write my own book, and so I'd like to ask you to pre-order it by clicking the link right here on the screen. And if you buy within this pre-order period, your book is going to come with a signed nameplate. As you know, I've never had a single sponsor on my channel. I don't ask for money or anything like that, but if you're looking for a way to support me, this is hands down the best way to do it. So again, follow the link right here on the screen, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for pre-ordering Shameless. And as always, make sure to subscribe to see more of my content.